Imagine a single, unarmed suspect stepping forward to interrogate a 600-man, heavily armed SWAT team that was just sent to arrest him.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but with just two simple words, he puts every single one of those trained operators flat on their backs.
That is just, I mean, it's a completely bizarre image.
It really is. That totally inverted power dynamic is exactly what we are looking at today.
Yeah.
Because it's an ancient arrest record that completely defies how we, expect these kinds of historical narratives to play out.
Definitely. I mean, normally the authorities show up, right? They have the numbers, they have the weapons, and the captive is just the helpless victim.
Exactly. It's supposed to be the moment of ultimate defeat. The state or the military has won.
Yeah, that's the universal expectation when you read about a political or religious dissident being rounded up in the middle of the night.
But the text we are diving into today absolutely refuses to play by those rules. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating 2026 presentation by Chris Myers, and he analyzes the text of John chapter 18, verses 1 through 11.
It's such a brilliant analysis, too.
It really is. And our mission today for you listening is to explore this centuries-old literary and historical puzzle. Basically, how do you convince people to trust an arrested Messiah?
Which is a huge PR problem if you think about it.
Exactly. We're going to unpack how the author of this text used these incredibly specific, hidden in plain sight details to portray a captive not as a victim of a midnight ambush, but as a high priest, a king, and a prophet.
Someone who was actively, almost aggressively, orchestrating his own fate.
Right. So regardless of whether you're approaching this from a historical, literary, or purely theological perspective, understanding the original context of this text completely flips the meaning of a story you probably thought you knew.
It's honestly a masterclass in narrative subversion.
So to really understand that subversion, we kind of have to start with the people who actually read this first, right?
Yeah, because you really can't understand the strategy of any writer unless you know exactly who they're writing for.
Right. So the Gospel of John was written around 90 to 95 AD. And chronologically, that is more than 30 years after the other historical accounts like Matthew, Mark, and Luke were already in circulation.
And, that 30-year gap is just monumental.
Why is that?
Well, by the time we hit the 90s AD, the original audience for John's text wasn't just facing, casual social rejection anymore. They were enduring violent systemic persecution.
Oh, wow. Like state-sponsored.
Exactly. This was largely under the Roman Emperor Domitian. And Domitian was an emperor who literally demanded to be revered as a living god.
So not a great time to be claiming allegiance to a different king.
No, not at all. If you were part of this early Christian movement, you were viewed as a direct enemy of the state. These people were being hunted down, they were losing their livelihoods, and understandably, a lot of them were abandoning their beliefs entirely.
Just out of sheer self-preservation?
Right. I mean, you can't blame them.
Which makes perfect sense. I mean, if your life is constantly in danger, you start asking some very logical existential questions. You're going to ask, is this worldview actually reliable?
Yeah, because if the person we're following is supposed to be God, how was he so easily arrested and killed by mere men?
Right. It's like if you are freezing in the woods in the middle of a blizzard, you're going to read a survival guide very differently than if you're sitting in a cozy living room,
That's a great way to put it. John's audience was freezing in the woods. They were in an absolute state of panic.
And that panic is exactly what Myers highlights in his presentation.
Yeah, he uses a really grounded analogy to explain their mindset, which I love. He says, imagine you were forced to drive across the country, right? And you have dependents with you who can't drive and have zero money.
Okay, high stakes.
Very high stakes. And you have to pick a single vehicle for this intense journey. Are you going to pick the flashiest car, the biggest one, or the one with the best fuel economy?
I mean, you pick the most reliable one. You don't care about the aesthetic or the gas mileage at that point. You just need to know the engine isn't going to blow up and leave your family stranded in the desert.
Precisely. When times are hard, human beings crave reliability over everything else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And John knows his audience's faith is basically breaking down on the side of the road. So his entire narrative strategy in this arrest scene is to prove that the vehicle of their belief system is fundamentally indestructible.
Okay, but wait, if I'm a first-century reader hiding from Roman soldiers, how does an account of my leader being arrested by Roman soldiers actually comfort me?
Right, it sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah. It seems like it would just reinforce my trauma.
Well, that brings us to the first major psychological shift John employs. He completely reframes the captive. He doesn't show Jesus as a victim being hunted down. He establishes him as the ultimate high priest who is deliberately managing a planned sacrifice.
Deliberately. Okay.
Yeah. And he does this by connecting the arrest narrative directly to the preceding chapter, which is chapter 17.
Let's unpack that connection a bit. What is the significance of chapter 17?
So chapter 17 is universally known as the high priestly prayer. And Myers points out in his analysis that this prayer is structured exactly, and I mean exactly like the high priest duties outlined in the Old Testament.
Specifically in Leviticus, right?
Right, Leviticus chapter 16. The high priest prays for himself, then for the priests, and then for the whole congregation.
Oh, wow. So it's a direct parallel.
Exactly. By mirroring that exact structure, John signals to his readers that Jesus isn't just acting as a civilian about to be murdered. He is operating in the official, authoritative capacity of a high priest.
Okay, so he sets up the role.
Yes. And then, once that role is established, he physically moves the scene to a very specific, visceral location.
Right, because the text mentions that Jesus and his disciples crossed the brook Kidron to reach a garden.
Which is a huge detail.
It is, because to a modern reader, if you say crossing a babbling brook, that sounds idyllic, you know? It sounds like a peaceful, moonlit stroll.
A nice little retreat.
Yeah. But the source material completely shatters that peaceful image when you look at the time of year. Because it's Passover.
And the logistics of Passover in first century Jerusalem were just staggering.
Paint a picture for us.
Well, the Jewish temple was situated up on a hill, elevated above the surrounding valleys. During the Passover festival, historical estimates suggest that upwards of 200,000 lambs were sacrificed at that temple.
Wait, 200,000?
Yeah, over a very short period of time, too.
The sheer mechanics of that are kind of hard to wrap your head
It
around.
was essentially an industrial-scale operation, and all the blood from those hundreds of thousands of sacrificed lambs was poured over the temple altar.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and they had this intricate drainage system that channeled all of that blood down the hill directly into the Kidron Valley and straight into the brook Kidron.
Okay, so when John casually mentions crossing the brook Kidron, he isn't describing a scenic route at all.
Not even a little bit.
A first-century audience who intimately knew the geography and the festival practices, they would have immediately visualized the reality of that night.
Absolutely.
Jesus is physically stepping over a literal river of blood draining from 200,000 Passover lambs.
It is an intensely graphic and deliberate literary device. It operates as cultural shorthand for the audience.
It's kind of like mentioning Wall Street to an American today, right?
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, you don't have to explain that there are stockbrokers or trading floors there. The cultural and financial weight of Wall Street is instantly understood by the reader.
That's a perfect parallel. By placing Jesus at the brook Kidron during Passover, John is communicating to his audience that Jesus is the true Passover lamb. But crucially, because he just acted as the high priest in chapter 17, he is the priest managing his own sacrifice. He isn't running away.
He's wading right into it.
Exactly.
It's not a retreat. It's almost like a general willingly walking onto a battlefield knowing the exact outcome of the war.
Yeah, he knows exactly what's coming.
Because the text explicitly notes that he goes to a garden, the exact garden that Judas, the guy betraying him, knows he frequents. I mean, if you are trying to avoid arrest, you don't go to your usual hangout spot.
You certainly don't. And that garden setting is actually the second layer of this literary strategy.
Oh, really? How so?
Myers points out that John uses the garden to draw a direct parallel back to the book of Genesis, like the very beginning of the biblical narrative.
Oh, right, the Garden of Eden.
Yes. In Genesis, you have a sinless man in a garden facing a representative of Satan. The serpent and humanity fails. Here, John presents a new sinless man in a garden facing a representative of Satan, who the text earlier identified as Judas.
But this time, the narrative insists the man won't fail. He is in absolute control.
Right. It's a complete do-over of that original failure.
Okay, so once John has convinced this terrified audience that their leader is a willing sacrifice in total control of his environment, he still has to address the next logical loophole, right?
Which is?
How do you explain the sheer physical embarrassment of being hauled away by a military force?
Right, because no matter how you spin it, getting arrested looks like a defeat.
Exactly, which is where the text escalates dramatically. We transition from seeing a high priest to seeing absolute, terrifying royal authority, basically a king.
And it happens the literal second this military force arrives.
Yeah, the source text notes that Judas arrives with what is called a band of soldiers. Now, What are we actually talking about in terms of scale here?
Well, in the original Greek, the word used for this band is spira, which historically refers to a Roman cohort.
A whole cohort.
Yeah, and a cohort consisted of anywhere between 200 and 600 highly trained, heavily armed Roman soldiers.
Wait, up to 600 soldiers?
Yes, this wasn't just a couple of local deputies with flashlights.
To arrest one religious teacher in a garden. That seems like a massive overreaction.
It does, but it tells you exactly what the Roman and religious authorities were expecting. They brought lanterns, torches, weapons. They were expecting a violent insurrection.
Or at least a massive fight.
Exactly, or a really complicated manhunt in the dark.
Yeah.
They fully expected the suspect to be cowering or fleeing.
But again, the power dynamic inverts. He isn't hiding. Jesus actually initiates the confrontation.
Yeah, he takes the lead.
He steps out of the shadows and asks this army of up to 600 soldiers, "Whom do you seek?"
And they answer, Jesus of Nazareth.
Right, and his response is where the linguistics completely shift the narrative.
Yes. In our English translations, his response is usually rendered as, I am he. But in the original Greek text, the phrase is simply ego eimi, which just means I am.
Which, sounds pretty innocuous in English, but historically that is a massive claim.
Is the ultimate claim of divine authority. I am is the direct callback to the book of Exodus chapter 3.
The burning bush, right?
Yes. When God speaks from the burning bush and reveals his foundational name to Moses as I am who I am.
Oh, wow.
And throughout John's entire gospel, he builds up these famous I am statements, like I am the bread of life, I am the good shepherd, I am the light of the world.
So by standing in front of an arresting army and simply declaring I am, he is flat out identifying himself with the God of the universe.
He is. And the physical reaction to those two words is just staggering.
Yeah, John writes that all 600 of these hardened, disciplined Roman soldiers physically draw back and fall flat on the ground.
Which is wild. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of ancient biblical literature, this is a profound moment of political and theological subversion.
So.
Throughout texts like Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, whenever the unshielded glory of God is revealed, the natural, unavoidable human response is to physically collapse.
Like their bodies literally can't handle it.
Right. Human beings just cannot stand upright in the presence of the divine.
So a first-century Christian reading this, who might be terrified of Roman soldiers knocking on their own door, suddenly sees the entire Roman military machine flattened by two words from their captive leader.
Exactly. John is illustrating that no matter how much military might or systemic power Rome brings to the garden, they are completely impotent.
They have zero actual authority in this situation.
None at all.
But, and this is a massive analytical question, I think, if 600 soldiers are physically incapacitated, flat on their backs, why do they eventually get back up and arrest him anyway?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, is John actively trying to show the reader that this arrest only proceeds because Jesus explicitly allows it to?
Yes, 100%. That is the critical takeaway for the persecuted church. The Roman Empire did not overpower God.
Okay.
The text shows Jesus asking them a second time, whom do you seek?
Yeah.
And then, right in the middle of his own arrest, he issues a command to the soldiers.
He tells them to let his disciples go.
Exactly. He dictates the terms of his own surrender.
So he's acting as the good shepherd, ensuring his flock is safe before he goes.
It proves to the reader that he is entirely directing the scene. He is sovereign. He is acting as a king who permits himself to be taken, but only after demonstrating that no one could take him by force.
Man, that is powerful. So we have this beautifully constructed literary portrait, right? The captive operates as a priest, willingly crossing a bloody brook, and a king who can floor an army with his voice.
Yeah, it's incredibly layered.
But the tension in this scene is astronomical, and eventually it breaks. Someone panics.
Yeah, they do.
And that physical confrontation reveals the third role we talked about. A prophet who is executing an unavoidable divine plan without resorting to violence.
And this is where we get the infamous intervention by Peter.
Right. The text says Peter draws a sword and strikes the servant of the high priest, a man named Malchus, and just slices off his right ear.
Which is just so chaotic.
It really is. Now, I have to stop here because this has always baffled me. Peter essentially brings a pocket knife to a fight with 600 armed Roman soldiers.
Yeah, the math doesn't look good for him.
Not at all. That's either incredibly brave or he has completely missed the point of everything he's been taught for the last 3 years. It feels like he's just swinging wildly in a panic.
Well, the source material leans heavily into the idea that Peter vastly misunderstood the mission.
Really?
Yeah. Now, it does show that Peter was sincere. I mean, he had previously promised he would die for Jesus, and here he is actually willing to take on an entire Roman cohort.
You have to give him points for loyalty.
True. But Peter's psychology is crucial here. Like a lot of people in the first century, Peter still expected a political, militaristic Messiah.
Oh, I see. He thought the ultimate goal was the violent overthrow of Roman oppression.
Exactly. He thought they were there to conquer with swords.
And honestly, isn't that just human nature?
Oh, absolutely.
We see that instinct all the time today, even outside of a religious context. When we feel our beliefs or our way of life are threatened, our immediate modern instinct is to fight back aggressively.
Yeah, whether that's in cultural battles, on social media, or in politics.
Exactly. We want to win, and we want to win on our own terms by dominating the opposition.
That is the exact instinct Peter is acting on in the garden. But Jesus immediately shuts it down.
He rebukes him, right?
He rebukes Peter, commands him to put the sword away, and asks, "Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?"
And I think this is important for you listening. Why was telling Peter to put the sword away such a vital message for John's persecuted audience to read decades later?
Well, think about their situation.
If I'm being hunted by Emperor Domitian, a little self-defense sounds pretty appealing, you know?
Right, because meeting violence with violence was the expected historical response to persecution. There were constant Jewish uprisings against Rome during this era.
So John is addressing that urge directly.
Yes, John is showing his audience that the founder of their faith actively rejected that path, even when facing a deeply unjust arrest. The kingdom he was building wasn't going to be established by shedding the blood of his enemies. It was going to be established by his own blood.
It's a total paradigm shift. You don't conquer by killing, you conquer by enduring.
Exactly. And the historical aftermath actually proves that the early church eventually understood this profound shift.
Did they?
Yeah, according to historical tradition, all of the original disciples, except for John, who survived to an old age, were ultimately martyred for their faith.
Right.
And none of them fought back when their executions came. They had finally grasped what Peter failed to see in the garden. The mission was not about political conquest.
That's incredible. And there is this almost poetic detail about the specific man Peter attacked. John deliberately records his name, Malchus.
Which is super intentional.
Yeah, Myers points out that the name Malchus literally translates to king or kingdom.
It's a brilliant literary contrast.
Okay.
Peter attacks a man named Kingdom with a physical sword, trying to establish a physical kingdom.
But Jesus stops him.
Right. And while John's text focuses heavily on the theological meaning of stopping the violence, if we look at the Gospel of Luke's account of this exact moment, there is a physical action that is just staggering.
What happens?
Jesus actually reaches out and heals Malchus's severed ear.
In the middle of his own arrest.
Yes.
While the soldiers are literally putting their hands on him to take him away, he stops to heal the man who came to destroy him.
It's unbelievable. And according to early church tradition, Malchus eventually became a Christian.
Really? I mean, I guess if you think about it psychologically, that makes perfect sense.
Oh, totally. If you are sent to violently arrest a revolutionary and his fanatic follower mutilates you, but then the revolutionary heals you on the spot.
Yeah, that cognitive dissonance is going to shatter your worldview.
It's going to leave a permanent mark on how you view reality.
Definitely. And the source argues that through this specific action, Jesus is fulfilling the role of a prophet.
Right, because a prophet's job is to declare and fulfill God's plan.
And by healing the ear and stopping the violence, he demonstrates that the divine plan isn't about destroying enemies, it's about drinking the cup, enduring the suffering that is required to save them.
Which is the core message John needed to deliver to those terrified people in 90 AD.
And frankly, it is the core message that translates directly to a modern audience struggling with their own crises.
Absolutely.
So let's pull that thread for a second, because the source text makes a really fascinating pivot here regarding modern psychology.
Oh, I love this part.
It argues that we fundamentally struggle to follow any kind of higher calling while simultaneously trying to maintain our worldly comfort and affections.
We want the crown, but we don't want the cross.
Exactly. We want the victory, but we avoid the hardship at all costs.
It is basically the deepest dilemma of modern existence.
Yeah.
We are very comfortable living for our beliefs. We might even boldly declare we'd fight for them, much like Peter drawing his sword in a moment of adrenaline.
Sure.
But what we deeply resist is suffering for those beliefs over a prolonged period of time.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. Our modern culture demands convenience, ease, and immediate gratification.
It's everywhere.
Right. Because of that, we have developed this built-in assumption that if something is hard or if we are enduring suffering, it must mean we made a wrong turn somewhere.
We view hardship as definitive, unquestionable proof of failure.
Exactly. But this text argues the exact opposite. Hardship and suffering do not prove the absence of God, nor do they prove you have failed.
In the context of this ancient narrative, Jesus' intense suffering was the exact prescribed path he was supposed to take.
The cup he mentions to Peter isn't an accident, it is the mission.
Yeah. Sometimes suffering is simply the reality you must endure as part of a much larger unseen plan.
It completely reframes how we evaluate our own lives, doesn't it?
It really does.
If you are struggling to balance your ideals with the harsh demands of the real world and it's causing you pain, this source suggests that maybe you aren't doing something wrong. Maybe that hardship is actually proof that you are exactly where you are supposed to be.
It requires a massive shift in how we measure success.
Mm.
You really have to move away from asking, am I comfortable? And start asking, am I faithful to the path?
Wow. And John's persecuted audience desperately needed to hear that. They needed to know their suffering under the Roman Empire wasn't a sign that their faith was a lie.
It was an expected part of the journey.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? Let's distill the mission of today's deep dive.
Let's do it.
When you really take the time to analyze the historical context, the cultural geography, and the original Greek language, the story of this midnight arrest in the garden was never a tragedy about a defeated, helpless leader.
Not for a single second. It was a carefully constructed, brilliantly layered narrative meant to remind a terrified, hunted people of who was actually in charge.
It reminded them that their leader was a high priest who willingly orchestrated his own sacrifice, crossing a literal river of blood to get there.
He was a king who possessed such overwhelming authority that he could floor a highly trained Roman military cohort with a single phrase.
And he was a prophet who rejected human violence and healed his sworn enemy.
It completely changes how you read the text.
It's not a story of defeat, it's a story of total sovereign control.
Yeah, it really is.
And as we wrap up, there is one final thought we want to leave you with to mull over today, building on this incredible source material.
Okay, what is it?
I want you to think about the lifelong psychological aftermath for Malchus.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Here is a man, a loyal servant to the religious elite, sent into the dark to arrest a dangerous dissident. In the absolute chaos of that garden, he is violently mutilated by one of the dissident's followers.
He is bleeding out.
The mission is turning into a bloodbath, and in that precise moment, he is instantly healed by the very man he was ordered to destroy.
It's just incredible.
Church tradition says he carried that restored ear for the rest of his life and went on to become a believer.
The profound subversion of his entire reality is almost impossible to quantify. The very act that was meant to end the story becomes the ultimate proof of its reliability.
It really makes you wonder, how often in life do the exact moments or the exact crises that seem perfectly designed to destroy a movement, an idea, or even a person end up being the precise catalysts that preserve and expand them?
That's a powerful thought.
Sometimes the arrest is just the beginning of the real story. Something to think about the next time you feel like you're facing an overwhelming force. Until next time, keep diving deep.